I think the other thing too is like it's really tricky to do it with like synthetic data. So like you really need to be able to go and see what people are asking about what's trending online on a particular subject, see it over time, go back, look at the data. Almost like manual LM as judge stuff comes into play too. Like one of the really fascinating things is like take what the agent returned back to you, then take a dump of a larger data set over that time frame that includes the set it looked at, ask a more advanced model, well, what do you see? How do you compare that to what our agent came up with? And then you can use that to understand, okay, like, is there maybe a problem with the prompt? Is there maybe a problem with like how we're exposing the tool? Should we not have it even be part of the tool? Because this is a whole other thread we can go down. But LLMs are the most expensive switch statement on the planet by many orders of magnitude. And why do we think that having the agent figure out the 3 tool calls to call in a row and stitch them together every single time the human asks the same question is the right approach? Like, just make it one tool. Don't work so hard. And that also reduces hallucination. It gives you control over, well, don't make the LLM do math. Do it with code.
Hey, everyone. Today on Deployed, we're going to talk with Kevin Stanton, who's a distinguished engineer at Sprout Social. If you don't know Sprout Social, it's a public social media management company. They've been around for more than 15 years now, and they help customers make sense of what's happening about their brands on various social platforms. But what that means is they're processing billions of messages and trying to make sense of what's happening in all that noise. And they have built a bunch of generative AI features along the way, and most recently launched their new Trellis agent to help their customers do that with generative AI. Kevin's an experienced engineer. He's been at Sprout for 13 years. He's helped lead them through this transition for how they build generative AI products. And so today, the conversation gets into a lot of tactics, just real world experience. What have they done to make a complex agent work for customers that is now a key part of their product offering? So you're going to learn a lot about evals, some of their engineering practices, some of their team practices. It's a great conversation. Looking forward to hearing feedback, and thanks for listening. Here's Kevin. All right, everybody. Welcome to Deployed. We're here today with Kevin Stanton from Sprout Social, and I'm going to just jump right in, let Kevin introduce himself. Kevin, tell us more about like who you are. For folks who don't know, tell us what Sprout is, and look forward to jumping in together.
Thanks for having me, Ian. So I'm an engineer at Sprout Social. I actually started my career way back when in hardware. I was doing FPGA and ASIC design for wireless products at a research lab at Motorola. And I fell in love with Python and software while building test harnesses for those systems. I quit to do the startup thing, which failed as a product, but it enabled me to pivot to software. Recruiter found me, sent me on an interview to Sprout, and I chatted with their founder for a few hours, and the rest is history. So I've been at Sprout for over 13 years now. Sprout, the TLDR is integrated social media management platform for businesses of all sizes. We have customers that are small businesses, single individuals. We have enterprise customers. But basically, our software lets brands do the full spectrum of managing their presence online. So that could be doing customer service or care over social, content marketing, brand and reputation management, social listening, employee advocacy, influencer marketing, real-time news monitoring, all kinds of stuff. And we pull it all together in one platform. But I've worked across a ton of different teams, spent the last 6 years running infrastructure, and then I've been doing hands-on engineering the last couple of years.
So 13 years anywhere is a long time. You're in this like distinguished engineer role, and I know you've been thinking a lot about, how to build AI products at Sprout. So excited to hear about that. It is a kind of a fun connection. I'm glad we're having the conversation. For folks who don't know my background, I worked at a company called GNIP that then was acquired by Twitter. I was part of the developer products and developer platform team at Twitter on the product management side, ended up leading product there. And so I worked with, Kevin's team, not Kevin so much, but knew Sprout Social well for a decade as a customer of GNIP and then Twitter. And they were always some of my absolute favorite people to work with. So I'm glad we're having this chat. It's also kind of fun because I just have the context. I know about what you guys do, maybe more than the average person does. And we can get into some of the product side. But yeah, tell us about you all have went public a couple of years ago. A lot has changed, I'm sure, in the product. Generative AI has exploded since that time. what's shaped about how you're what's shaped your thinking about how you're building, AI products today?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, just like my entire arc at Sprout has been about learning to engineer with pragmatism and realism. I think like the trap that software engineers and entrepreneurs in particular fall into is presuming product market fit. That's what happened at my startup. So I'm always like seeking ways to build as little as possible to prove a hypothesis, but keep an eye on the horizon. And that doesn't change 13 years in. Like, if anything, it becomes more important because you get like confident that you know everything and you don't, especially with a sea change like we're going through now.
You had started working on generative AI products shortly after ChatGPT came out. I remember talking to your team early on. But like, when did this really start to become real for you and a thing that was like meaningful to spend time on?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for the first couple of years, there was a lot happening in the space, especially like a lot of focus on RAG. And I remember thinking like, yeah, this is interesting. Seems like kind of like an overcomplicated approach, but relevant in certain contexts. I've always felt that LMs are just a building block. And I think when tool use became more in vogue, that's when I started paying attention. We've had generative features in our app for a while, but they've taken the form that most people in the early days did. Like, it's kind of like sprinkling magic on top of something.
Yeah, help me draft a tweet.
Yep, exactly.
Like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But when I saw Anthropic's MCP blog post, then I was like, okay, I want to play with this. Because it felt more natural. So I think that was the major shift, is like, okay, well, what can we do if this is true? Because it's a more natural match to the platforms that SaaS companies have been building for 2 decades now.
Yeah. And one of the things I think we'll get into is just like all that you've done. I've really enjoyed our conversations. You've been really thoughtful about how to evolve an engineering team that hasn't been doing ML historically. There's so many people out there that are just building B2B SaaS of various shapes. Sprout's kind of a perfect situation, right? You all have been trying to make sense of billions of tweets and other social messages forever. So it's a great tool for the job. I think we want to, probably get more into how you all are building and like how you've evolved the team. But before we do, like, I just want to make sure we really ground in like what you're building. So you mentioned tool calling, you mentioned like MCP lit something up, caused you to like lean in more as an engineering leader. Let's dig into that a bit. Like, what did you do with it? Let's maybe put it in context of what are the core kind of features or jobs that Sprout solves for your customers today. And then talk to us about like where you've pulled in, generative AI to help.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I mean, like, as I mentioned before, the MCP was kind of like the light bulb moment. So I had started prototyping in early 2025. Just trying different things to see like what could we do, like how good are the LLMs out of the box, things like that. But like Sprout has a lot of different products that we've had over the years, but the core of it is like, it's almost like I can't remember the acronym. It's like the observe, reason, act loop.
Yep.
That like humans go through all the time. And it's like, you've got lots of data coming in. You've got content that you're publishing to try and build your brand or do marketing online. And then you've got people coming back to you responding, whether it's because your content or because, hey, Verizon, my internet's down or whatever it is. So there's so much happening online, and customers sort of just like, they can reach out to you through these channels across all the different social networks and review sites. So being able to manage that it's really hard. There's a lot of noise on social too. Anyone who spent 5 minutes on X knows that that's the case. Yeah. So our application of it, like we started with like our world as our oyster, but then we zeroed in on social listening, because social listening, I think, is the hardest thing for people to do effectively, because there's so much data and it's just unrealistic for like people who are not data scientists or statisticians or BI people to make sense of it all. So that's where we started.
And that's like, I mean, the stuff that I lived for a decade, working with you all and others. But, those listening use cases, people probably think about the obvious stuff like, oh, tell me when somebody's mentioning my brand. That's not a hard problem. But there was projects I was involved in through the years where we were trying to help, global brands make acquisition decisions based on, trends that were happening in certain segments of conversation on Twitter that weren't even about their brand. They were just about food categories or restaurant trends or whatever else, right? And like those are the sorts of things where if we had had generative AI, like it would have just been life-changing because, traditional search, you basically were finding like, well, here's a whole pile of maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of messages that are loosely about this category. Now, what do we do with them? So yeah, I think like I can just imagine the benefit for your customers. And then so that's where you started digging in. Um, you know, what has matured since then? Like what can customers do today that they couldn't do before with social listening and Sprout?
Yeah, so we went from prototype to getting stuff into the app very quickly and getting in front of like internal users and then early customers. The main thing that was like the light bulb moment for us is like what is driving the conversation? What are people saying about my brand? What are the themes that are coming out over the last week, the last month, whatever? And the ability for LLMs to, both, select the right tools and take human prompts and go and fetch the data and then synthesize analysis was huge because like there's just no one is ever going to do this manually. I mean, from early on it was exciting, but what really got me like holy shit, we are onto something is I used our listening's competitor topics where you can fit in like, okay, like let's say you're a sneaker company, you want like Nike, Asics, Adidas, whatever, you put all those in. And then I was like, hey, like compare how we're showing up online. And, it churned for a couple minutes. It came back and I was like, wow, like you can clearly see which brands are having the best engagement online, what people are talking about theirs versus others. Like it is the pre-seed to a strategy brief of how do you want your brand to be viewed by your customers. And it took 2 minutes to do that. If you went through and grabbed all those tweets and tried to do the analysis yourself, there's no way.
So that's manifested in your product today. You recently launched something called Trellis. Like, is that what Trellis is? Or how else would you describe, like, what's the product experience for your customers?
Trellis is the name. The first agent, we're still in a beta period, but we've got a couple thousand customers using it now. It sits as a chat interface and it's kind of like a co-pilot within the application. So we've not just given you a chat experience, but we've started to build some like awareness so that Trellis actually knows what you're looking at on the screen. If you're looking at a particular social search that you have and listening, it knows what date time pick you have, the time range you're looking at, if you've got any filters, and it can use that to modulate how it makes tool calls for you. So it takes away some of the burden of chat because chat is both like the best and the worst interface in some respects.
I was going to ask you how you decided on chat, right? Like, I think there's pros and cons. We all love it for a coding agent interface, but it's terrible for guiding a user to do the right thing in a, B2B SaaS application. Like, where did that conversational UI, or how did that decision come about to do a conversational UI?
It was two things. One is it's just conversational interfaces with agents is a nice, like, just get started. And that's true whether you're a developer or a user. And some of it's strategic. It's like your users for the first time have a text box where they can ask your app to do anything. Like it's like the product manager holy grail, right?
Yeah. Whether it can do that yet or not, but at least they can try.
Exactly. And I mean, like people started asking for help about how to use other parts of the app. Or like, okay. So it's really rich signal from your users of what they want out of your software. It's also the way to seed your evals. You need traces from real people, and that's probably the biggest reason we started there.
Interesting. So you had that thought in mind when you were getting started that if we actually provide this open-ended UI, it's going to help us get to a better eval data set faster.
Yeah, because like the tricky part with social, and I imagine a lot of other software where you're trying to like flip ChatGPT or Claude on its head and bring the experience closer to your data and your software experience because you've got a decade plus of useful software workflows that are hard to replicate outside. So it's like, how do you find the opportunity in where your software is falling short and like build that flywheel? And the eval data sets for social is like, I mean, you still have to develop ground truth. You have to figure out a way to go, I looked at these 300 tweets and is this analysis right? Is the LLM making up numbers? Is it hallucinating facts? Because I mean, they still do that right out of the box.
And maybe only worse as you get deeper into a conversation. But no, that's cool that you all are thinking about it that way. I think you're probably on I think there's a trend more in this direction, but a lot of folks are not thinking from the start of building the product, like what is the interface design and product UX that's going to actually help us, curate good real world production evals quickly. So it's probably something a lot of other folks could learn from. You've talked about like how what this is doing is not just generic RAG or just off the shelf LLM usage. Like what parts of what you all have built so far do you feel like are proprietary or strategic? Like how did you think about building a more complex and differentiated product experience?
Well, so I mean, a couple of things. Like I think MCP, like RAG has its place, but MCP I think is a much more natural fit when you're trying to take a system of record and apply it to an LLM to get insights for customers. So, before LLMs and agents were at the forefront, we had invested a lot of R&D over the years building proprietary models for classification, because even without LLMs, you need to find a better way to steer relevant information to your customers, whether it's this is the most important message for your care team to deal with right now, down to this is spam, don't bother showing it to me, or don't aggregate messages that are spam. So like we spent years building that part of our platform pre-LLM, and now it's just like icing on the cake. Like we can say human language query to, it doesn't even have to be semantic. It's like, find me the most relevant negative sentiment messages about your most recent product launch. Holy shit. Like that's the power.
Yeah, it's like instant signals, the job that the human social media manager's been doing with Sprout for a long time. You can give them superpowers to just get there faster. Let's talk a little bit more about how you built it. Like one of the things I'm curious about too, you mentioned MCP. I think I know a bit about what you're doing, but like, is that MCP server for listeners, like for your customers or for your team? Like where have you plugged MCP into the process?
A few different places. So we use we're a Drop Wizard shop, so all of our backend APIs have been Drop Wizard for more than a decade. So we essentially took like the Java SDK, folded it into that, and made it so that our existing API endpoints could essentially be bridged onto MCP. So that's what's powering Trellis, and like we've built up other MCP APIs across other parts of our stack as we're evolving Trellis forward. We also have a public MCP server that we integrated with ChatGPT as just like another interesting, like, how do we get insights to meet customers where they are? And then finally, we have one MCP server that's like fully internal right now that one of our web engineers built. That's like, I have this code base. We have a common component library for Sprout as a brand. Can you help me convert to use the standard component libraries? So it like has awareness of how the components work. Claude looks at that and goes, okay, I'm going to like make the code Sprout compliant, if you will.
Yeah, I knew that you were, the choice to use it internally, like not everybody's made that choice. I think it's the obvious external thing to expose for your customers to ChatGPT versus just making, internal service calls. Like, why did it make sense? What do you feel like? I guess like if I were to frame the problem, some engineers might say, this is really just a wrapper on an API. If they haven't gotten over the hump yet, like what made it worth it to build that as an internal service?
Well, I think interestingly enough, I think it's because it's just a wrapper. Like it's not hard. It is a standard, and that's compelling in and of itself, especially when like us as a company, like we're not like full on microservice-y, but we've got hundreds of services, and you want a natural way to just have teams go, I can expose what I have in a way that's usable for agents. I mean, it's not been without its like twists and turns. Like I think like I was at the AI World's Fair conference in June last year, and there's like a talk on security, and they're like, well, we kind of implemented OAuth wrong for MCP, and by the way, there is no tool level permissions, and most stacks I don't think are using OAuth internally, so we had to like build our own and then like work with the community to get to a point where it was easy to do, because we need to have permissions, like all of our permissions that exist in the non-agentic land in our software stack have to apply.
And sounds like it's been worth it. Like you pushed through that. And, how would you describe the upside?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that like engineers who have been writing REST APIs their entire careers, like they came in and they're like, yeah, I get this. I mean, I don't want to paper over the complexity of getting tool descriptions right, because that is part of the eval process. But like it's the same problem as prompt engineering, just in a different space. And like the key is like, can you at least get the data available to your agent so that you can start iterating on how do we find value? How do we create evals that are robust? How do we deliver insights?
I mean, I want to ask some other questions about like what you've built. One of the obvious ones is you just got a lot of data flowing through the system, a lot of unstructured text data or lightly structured. How have you made this like architecture work to ask questions about, potentially billions of social posts? Like just what's that pipeline look like?
Well, so I'd be lying if I said we solved it, but we've started down that path. So I go back to what I said earlier a little bit about like enrichment models, classification models to create relevancy signal. That helps a ton, because there's a lot of tweets that like analyzing them is just not worth it, for instance. So being able to expose enrichments as filters for the LLMs when they call tools is a key part of that. Some of it is data fetching strategy, and I mean, I think there's papers on like how to subsample and stratify social media messages to get reliable insights out of that. And we've spent a ton of research on how to do that too. But at the same time, like kind of like guiding your users to picking a more specific question, like how is this thing trending over this time period? Like, and even the defaults, like we guide the user to by default, if you ask a question of like, well, what's trending with my brand's customer insights topic, we start with a week, because saying like, well, what happened in the past 6 months? Like, well, there could be 40 million tweets. Like, you're not going to get good results there.
And you've designed that into like the conversational UX. The agent will just kind of guide and shape the, calls that need to be made by going back and forth with the customer. Like, how do you guide them to ask things in a constructive way?
That's a great question, because it gets into like where we see like chat evolving and how we're, improving the agents over time is like, I think our designer and our product folks, like they call it the blank page problem. Like lots of people are using AI, but like that doesn't mean they feel comfortable. So we introduced this idea of conversation starters. So like they're pre-baked prompts that we know are going to work well, that have been evaled for performance, that kind of like get the user over the hump so that they can see, oh, this is the kind of stuff I can ask about. And then they can ask follow-up questions. They can go, well, how does that compare to last week or last month? And that's really helping like seed people's like, well, what do I do with this? And we want to get to a point where users can come up with their own and save them and schedule them later. And like, we want to flip this to like proactive insights delivery.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem that like I'm sure a lot of other product teams need to deal with, right? Like you're basically at a simplistic architecture level, you're building an agent to help your users structure a good tool query that you can actually answer in a tractable way that's a good user experience, right? And so like it is this open-ended interface. You have this blank page, but you kind of don't want them to just go full blank page, right? Like this isn't supposed to be a general purpose model. It's not ChatGPT, and not every query is going to work. And so like the pre-canned prompts at the beginning as conversation starters make sense as an initial jumping off point. Have you done anything else to try to like keep people on the rails once the conversation begins? Or is that like a problem that is for the future. But I'm just kind of curious how you, once they start going down a path, how you keep them on a direction you can actually answer their questions.
Yeah. So we're kind of experimenting a, a bunch of different paths in that regard. Like some of it is we're starting to bring other parts of our application into the agent experience. Like we're building another agent that covers more of like the how do I analyze the content that I've been publishing? How does it perform? What are people saying in response to the campaigns that we've pushed out? So we're trying to connect like the public social media monitoring with I'm a brand, I have my social presence online, I have messages coming in, I have content being published going out. So we want to start like completing the whole picture and then eventually get into influencer marketing and news and everything else. But the other part is like to me, I think where like some of the most exciting parts of agents live in software, which is agentic summoned UI. I think that there's a couple of like competing early frameworks for this stuff, but like from the very early days of our prototyping, we're like trustability proof of what the agent is saying is paramount. And we had the LLM summoning UI components that would draw graphs that mirrored how they look in our application. So a user could go, oh, that's what's trending. Here's the graph that proves it. And that graph matches the graph in the rest of our software. And that's just the beginning. It's like, if we can bridge that gap in a co-pilot way, the logical conclusion is, well, how do I go from insight to action? So how do we make it so that like it analyzes how your content performed? It looks at where you may be falling short. It looks at what you've got planned for next week. It makes some recommendations and you hit a button and it like makes the calls to the API for you to make adjustments. I mean, it's all like human in the loop, but like being able to truly move between human in control, agent in supervised control, if you will.
This is great. Like I don't think there's enough conversations about just like what are other people building and how are they solving these problems. I could keep picking your brain on them. I think one of the things you mentioned before, we're going through this ourselves, building our own insights product, but like, insights about social media posts, it feels like you could have an agent make up all kinds of stuff, whether they're actual hallucinations or just not helpful. But like, how do you guide if like part of the goal you're trying to deliver on is high quality insight about a big pile of social posts, trend level stuff? How do you keep the answers like grounded and good and on par with what a human expert would come up with?
Yeah. I mean, I think the secret that's not so secret is it's tedious human review. You've got to do it. It's just the nature of the game. Cause like I think that the biggest thing I keep reminding myself is that like somebody said something like LLMs are like the most well-read baby on the planet.
Maybe the most well-read fourth grader or something. Yeah, pick your age group.
Yeah, like with suspiciously good vocabulary. Like you're training a thing, like, and you if you think back to school, like when you're learning like long division, you didn't do 3 examples, like 3 shot, and they're like, I got it. Like, you have to throw lots of different stuff at it. I think the other thing too is like it's really tricky to do it with like synthetic data. So like you really need to be able to go and see what people are asking about what's trending online on a particular subject, see it over time, go back, look at the data. I mean, this is where like almost like manual LM as judge stuff comes into play too. Like one of the really fascinating things is like take what the agent returned back to you, then take a dump of a larger data set over that time frame that includes the set it looked at, ask a more advanced model, well, what do you see? How do you compare that to what our agent came up with? And then you can use that to understand, okay, like, is there maybe a problem with the prompt? Is there maybe a problem with like how we're exposing the tool? Should we not have it even be part of the tool? Because like, this is a whole other thread we can go down, but like LLMs are the most expensive switch statement on the planet by many orders of magnitude. And why do we think that having the agent figure out the 3 tool calls to call in a row and stitch them together every single time the human asks the same question is the right approach? Like, just make it one tool. Like, don't work so hard. And that also reduces hallucination. It gives you control over, well, don't make the LLM do math. Like, do it with code.
Have you gone through iterations on your tools that look like that? Like where you've seen what's happening in the real world and realized there's some cascading set of requests happening and you just describe or decided to collapse it? I think it'd be interesting to hear how, like, what's a practical example look like?
So we've just started doing that. And like, I mean, one example that's sort of funny is we have like a specific summarization tool that has an LLM inside it. And like when the tool fails, the LLM just summarizes anyway, but it doesn't have our prompt or our approach. And then like you get really weird results and it hides the fact that it failed. I mean, honestly, it's being driven by cost. You're looking at like, holy crap, like that agent run costs this much. It took this long. Most of the time spent is just reasoning on tool selection. Well, if it's going to do the same thing over and over again, like maybe let's collapse these tools. Or we also have cases where like I think we got a little too fancy with tools where it's like an enum that switches the behavior of the tool and like it just ends up calling the wrong tool 20% of the time. And then the user has to ask follow-up questions, which just makes it slower to insight, more expensive. Like I think that to sum it up, the temptation to have the LLM do all the reasoning work is great. And like you need to be cautious about overusing it.
I mean, you're kind of getting into this space. I assume some of that stuff you just described, you learned it by just like looking at production traces or, beta traces. And you also mentioned earlier that like part of the vision was to start with chat so you could collect good eval data. But like maybe, those two things come together at some kind of process you're running internally. I'd love to talk a little bit more about like how you've built the eval part of your stack and, how you've gone from collecting these traces to actually having some useful evals. Maybe we could just start quick on like, what does your eval stack look like in practice? Like, how do you think about, the relationship between golden sets and the human review that you're doing? And you mentioned some LLM judge stuff. Like, give us the lay of the land on what you guys are doing as a starting point.
So we started off with what I call like baseline evals. So it's like bias, hallucination, tool selection, parameter extraction, that kind of stuff.
Common kind of generic metrics.
Yep. So we started with those just as we were like building out the tools and prototyping experiences. And once we established those, we started off running them manually. And then we started getting into, okay, like we really need to look at what the use cases people are coming to the agent for, which the conversation starters actually help because it's like you're biasing your users down paths that you believe are valuable and you can invest heavily in evaling because you have clear signal of this is the path the user took through the chat agent. And then you can start collecting. I mean, number one, you have to be collecting the traces. You need to collect everything. We started off with Phoenix, the open source platform from Arise, because it was easy to get up and running in production. We started doing OTel instrumentation, collecting traces. And then we started bringing that into like, let's start human annotation, establishing ground truth for these baseline evals and use case evals. And that's like, we're really at that like turning point now where we're getting into the use case evals. We have built automation. So we're running evals against our production agent on a schedule. We're also running it against golden data sets. We are actually alerting now when we break our thresholds for like hallucination or not, successfully doing use case one, that kind of thing. So we actually be able to like catch it and roll back the deploy and improve the prompt. And hilariously, most of the time, it's not the prompt itself. It's like some software deterministic bug that created some weird thing.
Talk to me more about like what those use case evals are. I think that you've been on a journey I think a lot of teams go through, which is if you're getting started, maybe never done LLM or chat evals before, like you kind of pick some metrics that are general and common in the industry, but then you've iterated into these use case specific evals. It sounds like part of that was just a function of seeing what people were doing and trying to correct it. But what are some of those? Like, give us a couple examples of, what you're tracking now and how they came to life. How did you discover that was a good eval?
what it boils down to is you have to look at what is the raw data that came in. So like when we're recording the traces, we're also recording the tool calls and the tool responses, and then humans looking at, well, what actually came back? Is the output of the LLM reasonable? Annotating that as correct, incorrect, and then building your LLM judge prompt around that. And then also just using that as like the flywheel to tune your LLM as judge prompts to catch hallucinations, to catch things that don't jive with what is in the MCP tool call.
And that's an interesting one I think a lot of folks run into as well, which is, you know, you got to babysit your evals now. You got to make sure you're keeping an eye on them. Um, how much time do you spend on that? And how do you go about deciding like when it's worth it to invest in eval quality or LLM judge quality versus just working on your core product?
Right now, we have the luxury of some really talented like ML scientists who are that's their core focus, because we're really trying to create institutional knowledge and frameworks so that evals become easier to apply across teams, because we don't want our ML folks to be bottlenecks for building agentic software, and I also don't think that they have to be. So for now, it's really like we need to treat this first agent as like we want to make world-class evals, because we want to figure out what do we spend time on, what do we not spend time on, what costs too much money, how can we shave down like the execution time and still get the same amount of signal on quality. I don't think we have the answers for that yet, but at least being able to plot in real, like every eval run, we like record the results in Datadog. We can see how things are fluctuating across all these axes over time. And we're using that as what is our coverage of our use cases? Because we have some that don't have any use case level evals yet, and we want to improve that. And then B, like, where are we slipping on our existing like baseline of performance?
I mean, that kind of gets to a relevant general product management engineering process question. Like, how do you decide what a good baseline is? This is a super open-ended agent that theoretically takes any question from a user. It'd be interesting to just hear you talk about that. Like, what's your decision-making process look like to say, oh, this is better, we're ready to ship? And like, what does getting better even mean internally?
I think that's an evolving standard. I mean, I think we all know this. You get pretty good results out of the box just copying and pasting or uploading a spreadsheet into ChatGPT. We want to obviously be better than that. And I think our evals right now and our human annotated data sets are getting us significantly better than that. But the definition of good enough, I think, is something we want to explore on the, like, what is the state of the art LLM? How does our agent behave when we swap that out? Looking at like, what is the absolute state of the art performance we can get versus where we are? Does it make sense to switch LLMs? Like, we're starting to scratch the surface of like context window management, because like we haven't really been super careful about how that gets utilized. And we know that like just the more the window fills up, the more likely you're going to have problems, hallucinations, what have you. And then like thinking through what like the user experience itself, like is chat like the endpoint for how people come in through the front door, or like is pre-computing insights with more small agents, if you will, preceding the answers and using the chat almost as like a guide to progressive disclosure of deeper and more targeted like valid insights. Because I think it's gonna be hard, I think, to do this all through the lens of like someone comes through a chat and they choose your own adventure. Like, I think that's where like multi-agent becomes really, really complicated, and people like don't really think through like, well, wait, are we really prepared to do this? Or should we focus on let's make these agent use cases best in class, and then get our users saying like, yes, I use this every week to understand and keep a pulse on it. I report up to my stakeholders. And it's like, okay, well, if you can do that and you can win and you can find product market fit on that, then we have the process to follow for any use case, any type of agent. And that's what we want to get to.
I think I'm tracking. Like your answers, I think a lot of people building these things feel similar, right? Which is there's this massive range of knobs you could turn, right? And you got to decide which knobs you want to turn. It sounds like what you're saying is like you've built some good foundational evals. Some are general, some are use case specific. But if I'm interpreting kind of like where you are right now, tell me if I'm hearing this right or correct me if I'm not. It's like you at least have this like foundational set of evals and then like this use case specific stuff so that as you try new tactics, you can like rerun the eval and just decide, is it like, are we getting better or worse? Like, but have you set a threshold or something like for a red green deploy? But there's something in there where you're like deciding on this. And then as you try these different tactics, you're just measuring, what happened on that same core eval panel.
Yeah. So I mean, like I guess my point is that our current thresholds, I think, are below where we want them to be. But it's like we want to keep moving the bar up as we get better at the flywheel. And that's where we're really like on this cusp of, I think we're taking a very like blunt instrument approach to evals right now. And it feels very uncomfortable because as software engineers, you're used to, oh, well, I right click in my IDE and rerun those 18 test classes, and it took 1 minute. And now I have confidence that like I didn't break something when I refactored this thing. Like, and the eval space doesn't have a perfect answer to this yet. And we're trying to figure out like how much of that is the platform, how much is the approach we take, how do we even know which evals to run regressions on so that the flywheel isn't ours every single time.
This stuff is so multivariant, but I think that the problem you're describing is one we're living in a lot of times with free play customers, which is everything is evolving at once, right? It's not just that the core agent is evolving and the use cases that people have for it are evolving, but like your evals need to evolve too. And what I'm hearing you kind of describe is this pattern. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out the operational side of it, which is, okay, you got your core eval you designed. You've been hill climbing that, trying to use it for deploy decisions. But then there are these kind of like aspirational, horizon tasks that you want to get good at. Like, how do you update your core evals? How do you decide when like getting worse is a good thing because you're actually trying more ambitious things? It's not as easy as just some of the static industry benchmarks where it's like MMLU or terminal bench is just fixed and, hill climb it forever. Like you're learning new things about your product that make you want to extend your evals. So yeah, I think like you're one of the teams that I know is just working through this stuff in real time and trying to figure out the patterns. But any other like reflections as we shift gears, maybe one more section of the conversation on the eval part of things, anything that you all have learned or would want to share?
I think the biggest thing is, and you and I have talked about this a bunch of times, like we've got to demystify evals, because I think that like if AI is about convergence and bringing all these different roles of how we build products more overlapping together, we've all got to be able to talk the same language and understand like, well, what does it mean if we want to make this product change? What does it mean for our evals? Are we investing in the right areas? Getting people just comfortable doing evals who are not ML scientists, because I think it's less foreign than people think it is, but you still need some way to like get people over the hump because the learning curve has this steep initial part.
Maybe that's a good transition. Like I wanted to ask you some questions about team. Like you've been, I'll call it for simplicity's sake, like, doing traditional distributed systems engineering for a long time. Now you're shifting more of your attention here. The team processes are evolving. You have an ML team, but like sounds like roles are changing. How has Sprout's just engineering, product design, ML organization evolved for generative AI? And like, where have you had to create new roles or upskill existing team members?
It's definitely still evolving. I think the biggest thing, it's not even about roles, it's about ways of building, is like you cannot waterfall agents. I think there's a lot of conversations on LinkedIn about product operating models, and I think like the entire SaaS space is going through this like existential crisis, and like I think the reality is that a lot of SaaS companies like say they're agile, but they're not. Um, and when experimenting with technology that's new and changing on a daily basis, you have to be flexible and just drive to like get something working. So it's less upskilling per se, although like the evals, I think everybody really needs to do some upskilling there. It's more about bringing a multidisciplinary team together and just everyone bring what they bring to the table and build fast feedback loops. That's a big part of it. Um, but thinking more from a macro standpoint, like I do fundamentally believe anybody can build AI agents, especially because the LLMs will keep getting better. We will keep understanding better like how to apply evals and LLMs and tools. Um, like so we're trying to build frameworks and across the stack, like the UI, MCP, building agents, evals frameworks, so that we can try to make that ramp less so that people are less afraid. Like, I mean, like we talked to some engineering teams early on and we're like, yeah, we need to use a build some MCP tool. And they're like, oh yeah, that'll take 6 months. And I'm like, no, it won't. Like it's just rest. Don't worry. Like, so I think it's like the hype machine creates this real like fear, uncertainty, doubt in people. And I wish it weren't that case, but like it really is just like a mindset shift and trying to get people to realize, yes, there's work here that is different in name, but like it's familiar. I mean, like we spent a lot of time over many, many years using Selenium, which to me is basically as deterministic as evals. Uh, and they're slow. So like we've seen this game before.
One of the things you're talking about, like that learning curve for people being intimidated, if they haven't gotten their hands dirty in this space, like that's familiar. I wonder sometimes how much of it is because there's a bunch of new tactics, terminology, buzzwords that it's like not clear how the pieces fit together. And like if you just think about it at a process level, like what's changed about your SDLC for AI? I'd be curious to hear you talk about like where do these pieces actually plug in a practical way that you've learned works for just running a software product?
I think the first thing paradoxically is don't couple evals to your SDLC too early. We tried to put them in CI/CD because we were like pattern matching, and then very quickly we're like, oh god, no one can deploy code. It takes too long. And by the way, they're non-deterministic. Like that is like the software engineer's worst nightmare is a flaky CI/CD test suite. So we had to pull back from that. I mean, it's don't ignore evals, get started early on, but like these are parallel paths where you try to figure out how to meet them in the middle. The other thing, like the corollary to that is we said, you know what, CI/CD we're going to walk back from. We're going to go really good at building up our eval suite, ground truth of golden data sets, and get to the use case eval world, build like a Kubernetes scheduled job that can run those on a cadence, get the measurement in place. Then you have a flywheel that you can start to build and improve. You need the flywheel. You need some way to look at a chart going up and to the right. And that's also just like how my brain works. I don't do anything unless I can chart something up and to the right. But I think that's where you have to start and then like work backwards to figure out how do you instill quality in the small granularity. And actually, one of the key areas that we've invested in is on the MCP side. We have built it so that we can in YAML produce fixtured MCP so that you can bring determinism to your evals. So you're not calling an MCP endpoint and every time you run the eval, the data changes slightly. Because I mean, like metrics in social are evergreen. So like yesterday it was 10 likes, tomorrow it's 12. Like, so you have to you're using old techniques in a new paradigm, but like that's been a huge help because then we get stability in our tests. But it's all just taking what we've learned and just applying it. The test pyramid looks a little like misshapen, if you will, but it's an ongoing process.
No, it makes sense. I think it is for everybody. I know we're getting close on time. Like any other dead ends that you'd warn teams away from if they're trying to build production agents?
I think the biggest thing is I like to say avoid going after AI trick shots. So like multi-agent is the biggest thing that stands out for me. Like multi-agent is this like, or like agentic meshes. It's like, yeah, we're gonna get there. The way agentic software is evolving is the same way that other software evolved, but like get one good agent, learn how to make one really good agent that delights your customers, then worry about multi-agent, worry about fine tuning, worry about like all those things. Like they probably all will come at some point for your product if your product's successful. But if you don't get the fundamentals right, you're spending an awful lot of R&D with very little guarantee that it'll pay off.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for spending the time. I know I'm going to respect your time. We're going to have to go soon. For people that want to follow along with your work and with what Sprout's up to, like what should they know?
So me, I selectively rarely post on LinkedIn. But I don't know. Side note, if you want to maximize your productivity building AI features, log out of LinkedIn. Like it's way too distracting. Pro tip. But for Sprout, like a couple of touch points. One, we have our insights blog. It's sproutsocial.com/insights. It's all things social, business strategy, things our product can do. And then our Breaking Ground webinar quarterly is just like the cool stuff coming up with our product.
Awesome. And I'll drop those in the show notes. Well, Kevin, this is great. Thanks for sharing all your wisdom and learning, sharing what Sprout's up to. I really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you joining.
Thank you. Great chatting with you.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode of Deployed, the AI Product Podcast. I'm Ian Cairns, CEO and co-founder of FreePlay. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you did, we'd love to hear about it. Your reviews mean a lot. They help other listeners. So give us a like, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if something stood out to you in the episode, or if you've got feedback or ideas for a future episode, or if you simply just want to learn more what we're up to at FreePlay, shoot me a note. I'm Ian at freeplay.ai. You can also find me on Twitter @Cairns. Thanks so much for listening.